And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Erin Pullyblank and Rachel McGonigle, penfield.ai. This is really interesting. What I love about these sessions specifically is I have to go through a lot of research myself because not all, even though I've been doing cybersecurity for quite some time, I'm not totally familiar with all areas within cybersecurity. And today we're going to cover some really interesting topic, explainable AI, which is an area we can cover in a few sessions, but we'll try to condense into a into a shorter session, which you can easily digest and while you're doing something else and watching this. So before we get started, maybe Erin, we'll start with you. Just if you can provide some insight in terms of your background, what you've done, how you got into cybersecurity.
Sure, David. Thanks for having me. I've been in cybersecurity for 15 plus years, and plus is where I'm leaving it. Most recently, I ran marketing and CrowdStrike for Canada. And then prior to that, I've held various sales and marketing roles at large system integrators, as well as, some data classification tools to support data security efforts for a startup company here in Canada. How did I get into cybersecurity? Well, it's kind of an easy question to answer. In that I started out my career selling photocopiers, and back when cold calling wasn't really picking up the phone, it was knocking on doors. And did I ever have some strong rejections? And that was sort of my pivot to find another calling, I think, as if I wanted to look at it as such. So here I am.
Interesting, Erin. You're not the first marketer that had to face rejection. I've had an opportunity to interview a person who started his career selling vacuum cleaners door to door and did that for 2 years. And after that, I think just like you experienced, nothing seems difficult. After you encounter that type of adversity. So and it's funny because photocopy machines are still around, after all this time, and there's quite a few issues with cybersecurity there as well. But thanks for providing that insight.
Yeah,
Rachel,
thanks
what
for
about
having
you?
me. I am a bit newer to cyber. I studied at Queen's University, and then I spent a few years working with technology companies and financial institutions to help scale their technical teams. So while I wasn't working in cyber, I had more of a unique insight into staffing and retention issues across the industry. Especially where you have highly technical roles that require niche skill sets, and it can be difficult to find those capabilities. So I actually was following Penfield back when it was in R&D mode, and they were going through the Creative Destruction Lab Incubator program. And I thought it was a really cool angle to take to focus on the human element in cybersecurity as opposed to what a lot of other companies are doing. So I jumped at the chance to join in 2020, and I've been part of the go-to-market team since then.
Thank you. And tell me a bit about I don't know, whoever wants to jump in, where the source of the name. It's really, Penfield. And maybe you can provide some insight in terms of how the company got
sure.
named.
It goes back to our Canadian roots. There's a famous Canadian neurosurgeon, Dr. Wilder Penfield, who is really credited with mapping out certain functions of the human brain and understanding what parts of the brain are associated with what actions in the body. And so it resonated with a lot of what we do here at Penfield, so we thought it would be great to pay some credit back to a Canadian.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. And if you don't mind me asking, in kind of we digress from the topic, but before, I just want to give kind of a background. I always find it fascinating the way marketing works with sales, and specifically in startup companies where everyone is really paramount in terms of moving the company forward. So at this stage of the game, in terms of Penfield, how do you work together as a team on a day-to-day basis? What is kind of most important thing for you, both of you, in terms of advancing the company's goal, which is, getting additional customers, advancing the technology and so on?
Yeah. So the way Rachel and I would work together is on a daily basis, using the usual methods, Teams, email, but it's very important that we focus on the goal of supporting the customers we have and enabling their success. So doing that through, whether it's a marketing campaign or something like that. And, marketing being a part of understanding what's happening within the industry as, from financial services to managed security service providers. Rachel and I work very closely on the trends of what's going on and how to position our product, if that makes sense, to solve some of the challenges that these customers are facing.
And I don't know if anybody wants to jump in terms of what does Penfield do and what is kind of the number one issue that it solves to its client.
Sure, I can
today.
jump in on that. So Penfield is the first human machine intelligence platform for cybersecurity. And human machine intelligence is really the unique ability to understand real-time human processes and decision making. So what we do is we model cybersecurity analyst skill sets, and we're able to then automate a number of SOC workflows, like automating alert assignment to the best analyst to reduce the mean time to resolve incidents, automate QA reviews on 100% of tickets, and more, to really focus on elevating the human potential in cybersecurity.
Wow, Richard, you've done a phenomenal job explaining. Very succinct. Thank you for that. In terms of the promise of, you mentioned that it's automation, right? In your opinion, what caused the delay in the promise of automation? You look at the past. What happened is since 2015, even further than that, there were a lot of industry buzz in terms of, okay, let's automate cybersecurity in all aspects of it, like in terms of the endpoint security, in terms of the SOC operations, and so on. But that promise failed, right? So maybe until now, right? What do you, in your opinion,
Definitely,
what caused
it's
that?
a trend that we followed as well, where our founders were noticing the notion that AI would automate everything for cybersecurity, but the reality was otherwise once we saw a lot of AI tools come into play, and that's because AI can only automate static, repetitive processes, but cybersecurity is a really complex and dynamic space where the context of the alerts is always changing, it's always evolving, and so we still really require humans in the loop to be able to interpret those patterns and make decisions on the fly.
So that interpretation, so do you find that the issue is more with the interpretation, or just the collection, or all of the above, or just having a difficult noise to to signal
I think it's
ratio?
a fine balance where SOC analysts are very they have a lot on their plate right now. There's a growing number of alerts coming in at all times, and as we know, there's a big talent shortage or skill shortage in the industry. So it's a fine balance to automate as much of that noise as possible and take some of that upfront work off of their plates so that they can really prioritize their time on the most high leverage tasks, focus in on the most critical alerts where their expertise is the most effective.
And do you find that that turnover, that fatigue in terms of the SOC operations, is that because the analysts are facing the daunting task of reviewing incidents very, very quickly, and some of which they've not seen before?
Yeah, I think for sure.
What's your take on it?
As we know, there's a big skill shortage in the industry, in a sense where when you have highly skilled analysts, they're very high in demand. And there's always going to be people knocking on their door, hoping to bring them onto their teams. And so if analysts are finding their time is spent on solving a lot of the noise first and not being able to focus on what excites them, which is the more challenging tasks or the more complex tasks where they're seeing their own skills advance, then they might get a bit bored and look to move on. So I think it's about really ensuring we're enabling our analysts to see their own growth and their own potential, and ensure they're spending their time on high priority tasks.
Fantastic. And just for the viewers to know, even though we've come up with a kind of a sample questions, most of this conversation is unscripted, and you both are doing a phenomenal job responding. If you don't mind, for those who are not familiar with the innards of a security operations center, what does that look like, and where is the inherent complexity in terms of running one?
Definitely, a lot of security operations centers have a number of tools in place to protect the business, where they have endpoint protection, they're detecting alerts that are coming in, but then ultimately, after all the automation takes place, the true alerts handed off to an analyst to then look at and understand what's happening and what to do with it. And often there's different tiers of analysts, maybe 3 tiers where alerts come in and can be escalated until the right person is found to address the specific problem. And so the focus that we take is, after that upfront automation, where the human comes into the loop.
And how is the success of a SOC being measured today?
Right now, there's the coverage of the tools. And then when we look at that human element, a lot of analysts are mainly measured based off of volume and frequency, how many tickets they're addressing in a given week, and then potentially their manager's perception of their performance. And while that's fine, it kind of skews to promote speed as opposed to accuracy and diligence. So we're hoping to introduce new metrics to focus on not just speed, but also the accuracy and the diligence, the progress and skill improvement, and more, so that we have a more comprehensive view of the SOC itself.
So that's interesting that you mentioned, basically the fact of the speed associated with it. So I'm assuming it's like how many tickets per hour or how many incident per hour the SOC reviewed. And, so how do you measure speed where not all incidents are the same? So one incident potentially can be something as mundane that was seen many times before, and then an incident can come out and it'll be completely unique, something like like a 0 day or something that I've never seen before. How do you prevent that from skewing, as you mentioned, skewing that
Definitely.
that matrix?
I think it's an important point that there's a lot of context that goes into each type of alert. So like you mentioned, even within different departments of a business, in a bank, an attack on your online banking server might be managed completely differently than the same attack on your rewards server. And that sort of diligence should be captured so that analysts are being rewarded for doing a diligent job. So that's the metric for accuracy that we're looking to incorporate. And
what does the Penfield deployment look like, and when does the potential customer and partners, and you're going to talk about that as well, is when do they see the value, and how quickly do they see the value for implementing the
definitely.
platform?
I think what we've seen over the past few years is security leaders have definitely heard a lot of hype around AI, and it's become a bit of a buzzword. So what is very core to our platform is establishing trust in our AI and its decision making. So what we do when we first get started is we actually do initial offline analysis of historic data to establish a ground truth and really gain our customers' trust in our decision making. And we really provide that explainability of, based on the data we're receiving, this is why our AI would take this specific action or make this certain decision, until they gain that trust. And then at that point, we'd be able to deploy in a test environment and do more of a real-time testing to demonstrate decisions before ever even getting into full production.
In the platform itself, where does it sit? Does it sit between in terms of the workflow, in terms of like where the all that data being siphoned from the systems, from the SIM or whatever the endpoint, and where does it sit, like between, like in actuality, like in the
Definitely.
architecture?
So we're built on Kubernetes. We can deploy in our customers' cloud environments, their private cloud environments, or on-prem. So all of the data and our model stays fully in their environment, keeping it very, very secure. And then from there, we integrate with existing SOAR tools today. So these are SIM tools, SOAR tools, ticketing tools, any others that they're interacting with, where we're capturing that data from those tools to understand the context of the alerts coming in, and then the context of the processes analysts are following, the decisions they're making, and the outcomes that they're coming to. And by understanding all of this together, we can start to curate an understanding of accurate processes in the SOC unique to that end customer. And that's all data that they retain.
In the process of starting to use the system, I'm assuming there's almost like an ability to, dial in and dial out the system, right? So they, before there's a complete trust, you can decide to use it as SAM capacity or not at all, or just as an advisory, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's
statement?
really important for anyone adopting AI to really know what they're adopting and understand how it's working. So we'll work with our customers to do more of a phased deployment in some cases. We'll work with them to tune even certain decision bounds. So for example, some customers would prioritize speed and volume of tickets coming through, and others might prioritize accuracy There's other decision bounds as well that we can just work with them to see what works for you and your team. And then we can do all of that in more of our test environment to see how that's actually going to roll out. And then only at that point, send it live once they're good with it.
And the idea of Penfield is not to displace the analyst, right? It's more of an assisted
Absolutely,
tool,
yeah.
right?
Our whole mission is to elevate human potential. We want to ensure that the noise is taken off analysts' plates and they can focus their time on the most high priority tasks that fit their skill sets. And a lot of the analysts that we're working with today are kind of excited about this because, like you and I have discussed so far, they're measured more on volume, whereas we want to introduce that extra level of diligence. So yeah, it's definitely being a bit of a sidekick for the analysts as they do their job.
And well, of course, because again, if they're more effective, it allows them to be more effective. They'll look better. And then overall, I think even the management, since the stock costs so much, and they can show additional numbers. Speaking of numbers, people always like to talk numbers, right? So what are we talking about in terms of improvement? Do you have
For
some
sure,
numbers
yeah.
you can
So
share?
far with our customers, we're showing anywhere between 25 to 38% reduction in the mean time to resolve incidents. And this is on top of the gains that they've already gotten from their SIM or SOAR or any other tools. So we're definitely improving the speed where now analysts have that much more time to focus on those high priority tickets. But another metric we're showing is accuracy. We have 100% QA review, meaning every single ticket that comes through the SOC gets a Penfield audit to make sure that the right processes are being followed. If there's any deviance in process, we can actually flag that to attention. And analysts have said that's like a spell check, essentially. They just want to know if they've missed a step so they can go in and quickly correct it.
So you mentioned, again, just to reiterate, because you kind of glanced through the numbers very quickly, but we're talking about 25
38.
to, you mentioned 38. And for those folks that are not familiar with these numbers, that's a big deal, right? So because if you can shave that amount from the overall how many minutes it takes to solve a ticket, this is a very, very significant, especially when we're talking about the cost associated with running a SOC. So potentially you can have between 25 to 38% more, more tickets processed, right? Okay, good. So, and you mentioned about the actual process of learning. You mentioned that you can potentially look at the history of what has been done, let's say in the past, the previous 2 weeks, and you can funnel that, through API, I'm assuming, to the system, and then the system learns on that data and provides some insight in terms of what potentially could have been, been done. What's that process like, in terms of the algorithms? Then we can jump into the topic of today, the explainable AI. How does where is the kind of the secret sauce associated with Penfield? How does that actually do the the explaining? Oh, I think did we lose her?
It looks like it.
Oh, she's back.
Sorry about that. I think I dropped off.
And you're back. I was just I was asking about where is the secret sauce? How does the algorithms learn? And I'm assuming that there's the whole point of AI and machine learning, artificial intelligence, is for the ability for the platform itself to learn from past actions and continuously improve. So where is the sweet spot? Is 2 weeks time in terms of the Security Operations Center operations, is that sufficient for the algorithm to really provide that value?
Sure, yeah. When
insight?
we start, we do an initial analysis or anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months of historic data. And this is really to just establish some ground truth and solve the cold start problem so that we can hit the ground running. But from there, once we're integrated with the tools, we update our models every single time a new ticket comes through. So we're using a form of online learning where we're constantly working off of the most up-to-date information rather than sticking to just that past historic data. And I think that's really critical in cyber, given the context of attacks is always changing. There's always new problems surfacing. So we want to ensure that we're able to always learn from those.
Absolutely. And, since the topic of the day is explainable AI, the issue of explainable AI is really, it's all about trust. how do we trust this, this machine or platform that operates autonomously, using, algorithms and machine learning? How do we trust that it actually knows what it's doing? And so maybe we'll provide a quick primer in terms of what is explainable AI, and then we apply that specifically to what Penfield does.
Sure. Erin, would you want to jump in?
Sure. So, from a brand perspective, it's really important that customers trust us, and typically I'm going to try and do that through, as a VP marketing, I'm tasked with getting those case studies, those customer references, and that's not going to happen if they don't trust us. So as we go through, we're like building out our product, working with these customers, we have to raise why a specific decision was made. Why we drew the conclusion, what the next decision can be. And in some cases, what was the other decision? These folks need to put their trust in us that we're, from a cybersecurity perspective, that we're helping that analyst protect their organization. So, these are the kinds of things that I need to convey, and Rachel as well, when we're talking to customers or prospects. Like if you look at the example of, let's say, an autonomous vehicle, this is a fairly newer concept, which isn't really generally understandable by the population. Are you going to get into a car that's not going to let you touch the wheel? Are you okay with it going at high speeds? I don't know how many customers are actually going back to a dealership and saying, now, why did you go that speed instead of this speed? But in the case of cybersecurity, these are the types of answers that we need to come up with. And if someone, like whether it's Penfield or another vendor, can't answer these questions and be transparent, how do you establish that trust and maintain your integrity? Because that's really everything at the end of the day. You don't want to be front page news.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the self-driving vehicle, I think we've been using AI and machine learning for quite some time, but there's always a mistrust in technology. Even when microwaves came out, some of us don't remember that, but there was a lot of mistrust, like in terms of the actual technology, in terms of what is it, like how does it actually do it. A lot of people did not use microwaves because of that. And then Erin, you have the difficult task to explain intangibles, right? So this is a problem, I think, with cybersecurity in general, that a lot of it is intangible. You can't touch it. You can't, feel it. You can't, you can only really measure the end result. So as somebody's been doing marketing for a while, how do you go about in defining, making a fairly complex concept more digestible to folks that are not, living and breathing this on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I get the privilege of translating what's coming out of engineering and data science teams. So they're really the ones that are able to explain it better than I. I still have the duty to the customer and the prospect, but, at the end of the day, when we do a demonstration or I provide visuals, a la marketing materials, it's important that we show that explainability level and are transparent in those decisions, why those decisions were made. And a lot of that's based on the data that we're collecting behind the analyst, whether it's their speed, their accuracy, sometimes what their stress levels are, how big their queue is. This is why we can, because of the information we're capturing, we can clearly identify why we're making the decisions we're making and why we didn't make another decision.
And when you describe it in kind of the marketing materials, do you try to apply a concept that that people are already familiar with, or just an example, as you mentioned, like the self-driving cars, to simplify and allowing people to apply things that they already know to the concept of becoming more efficient in terms of analyst operations? Do you typically try to do that, or do you use
I would
some
steer
other,
clear of the
tricks?
autonomous vehicles, to be honest. I don't like to be compared to that. I know there's fails in a lot of attempts at AI, obviously, but certainly it's having, for me, the validation of having engineering on the team, our director of strategy, and Rachel as well. When we have these calls with prospective buyers, that they're able to accurately see how we measure their success based on the explainability. I wouldn't go comparing myself to another vendor. We talk about how we do it differently, and because we are helping the human at the end of the day and using their context and marrying that to the alert data that's coming in from the tools that they're already using, we can show that very clearly, that explainability level.
And how do you close that loop in terms of customer feedback that you receive on a regular basis? And I'm assuming, again, because this is a moving target, you constantly have to look at what is the market telling you, what the customer is telling you, what are the recent trends in terms of cybersecurity to match that. How do you keep track of that, and how do you kind of massage the messaging to fit the kind of the current events, and in terms of the usability of the technology, in terms of where it fits, in terms of how it can help you. So for example, ransomware is a big deal, right? It's becoming rampant. We have geopolitical situations, and a lot of vendors are coming out and saying, well, we can help you with that. And you have to be careful in terms of not to be an ambulance chaser. But there's also, if you look at executives, right, they see the news, they read the news, they're part of it. So they're always interested and curious to see, okay, how do we prevent, ourselves from being the front news, right? So it's a kind of a fine balance.
So I guess from the ambulance chasing perspective, I like to obviously stay away from that. I think the way we can look at it is, these analysts are faced with ransomware, phishing attempts, 0-day, everything that comes down through the organization. So picking one of those would dissolve our message from being, we're there to help the analyst protect the organization as a whole. Yes, there's definitely things that are newsworthy. For instance, Okta, if you haven't looked at Google this week, us picking up on that and writing a blog, not something I would necessarily do, because what we're doing is explaining how the decisions that we're providing the analyst are better suited for different types of attacks within the organization. It's not just necessarily the one.
So you are generically improving the SOC operations to be, to allow for the client, the enterprise, to become more resilient for, future attacks. Not just it. And I'm assuming the trend is always up in terms of how many attacks are we getting on a day-to-day basis. And so this is where I think the beauty lies in terms of what Penfield does. If you look at SOC managers, I think they're all after efficiencies, right, and cost reduction on a day-to-day basis, right? This is something that's always ongoing. And we talk about also we'll maybe dive into like the service providers, because they're also after that, even more so, because they are building the customers and trying to become more effective and more proficient in terms of what they do. So in terms of customer feedback, what are you getting? Rachel, you mentioned, you kind of alluded to that previously, but what do you see from your customers in terms of after the initial installation and the tweaking of the platform through, for the first?
Yeah, definitely. We work really closely with our customers to make sure that it's uniquely fit to their specific need and solving their specific challenges. And that can be different for everyone. I think with MSSPs, it's a unique case because they're servicing a lot of end customers. And what we're seeing now is even the end customers are starting to require some levels of explainability on a couple of fronts. First is, not even just explainable AI, but explainability of the services itself. They're saying, we pay you a lot of money and we have to trust that you're doing a good job because we haven't been breached. But how can you actually demonstrate that your services are superior to others, or that your analysts are doing a diligent job? They're looking for insights into the processes and the accuracy now. And that's brought some customers to us. But even further is the demand for explainable AI. And this is in any organization, whether it's an MSSP or a financial services, where they've onboarded automation tools, and the goal is to build playbooks to take off a lot of lift from the analysts. But there's a big challenge in terms of identifying what processes to automate, why those are the correct processes to prioritize automating, and then even what to put into those processes, what steps should be built into that playbook. And so those are some factors of explainable AI that have definitely been very prevalent in our discussions as of late, and it's a big area that we play in today.
Yeah, it's super interesting. You mentioned that there's a requirement for MSSPs to provide insight to their services, because their services most times are these black boxes where they're it's per use per month, and then the output is sometimes vague, right? So you only see like, okay, how many numbers of incidents and how much it costs to run it. Do you provide the like a explainable AI certified tag? Maybe that's something you should do to
I
for your
love it.
customers. They put
I'd
on the
actually
website.
thought about that from a marketing
Some,
perspective, but at the end of the day, there's no stamp of approval or check mark in the box. It's just one of those conversational things that comes out from day one, and that we're purpose built with the customer in mind and always transparent with them.
maybe a logo like in AI we trust, and put that in the back of a Penfield T-shirt. At least give those out. So in terms of customization, what levels of customization is required, if at all? And I'm assuming, again, because of the way that the systems is being installed into a particular SOC, there's a certain levels of customization that's required after a while, and depending, again, the requirement, especially if it's an MSSP and running multi-tenancy, and even if not, large enterprise always requires some level of customization. Rachel, maybe you can
Absolutely, yeah.
help
I
me with
think
that.
every customer is different, and any solutions that come as out of the box are going to require heavy customization and a heavy lift. So we don't come necessarily out of the box, and we do that customization for our customers. So what we do is we'll integrate with their tools. We already have the integrations built out. If there's a new one, we will build that. And then, like I mentioned, we'll initially train our models on that historic data so that we can fine tune the AI with the customer, prioritize certain weightings, clarify any decision bounds to make sure that it's exactly what they're looking for and set to solve their problems. And then once we're integrated with the tools and working in a real-time setting, we're updating our models with every new ticket that comes through. So it's customizing itself in an ongoing fashion. And I think the good part is we keep humans in the loop. So if ever there's a flag from QA or a deviance in process, we can get a quick human feedback to confirm whether there was a mistake made or whether it's just a new, better process that's been followed, so that we can actually capture that information and update our models accordingly, so that we're not just working off of old, outdated information. And that's how we keep things up to date. Well, Penfield mostly works in the background integrated with their tools. We do have a dashboard they can go to log in and see some of the output. We have Penfield Pathfinder, which is our kind of our AI assistant, if you will, where we can send them prompts on the job, coach them as they're working through alerts. But most of our actions take place in the background, so they know we're there to help, but we aren't requiring them to go to yet another dashboard to do their job. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. When we're onboarding, as we're integrating with the tools, getting things set up, we do a demo with the analyst teams typically, and we walk them through what the platform does, how it works, what we're looking at, how it will help them, and what they can expect. And then we've gotten great feedback from them where they're asking, like, they've given us almost roadmap ideas. Does it do this yet? Does it do that? It's really exciting. So yeah, we definitely make sure they're aware of what's happening under the hood. But like I mentioned before, they definitely see it as an assistant. It enables them to focus on the more exciting work as opposed to the boring stuff, and can also act as a spell check, which is always nice to have. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, our goal is not to pit anyone against each other. I think the whole industry is aware that skill set is in such short supply right now that we want to make the best use of the team that we have and enable them to work even more effectively. There's, most of the security leaders I've spoken with, they want to hire more people onto the team. So if we can help the leaders pinpoint what skills do we have today and what skill sets should we hire for that'll be complementary to what we already have and fill some gaps, then we can just help them build out even more cohesive teams.
And you mentioned these tremendous numbers in terms of efficiency and effectiveness for reduction in the time to resolution, right? But have you looked into the numbers in terms of, for example, turnover, reduction turnover, satisfaction? Those are tremendous as well. If you look at those and see, okay, if we can help an analyst, stay on the job and not getting turned over, I mean, that by itself has a very high cost associated with it. Have you looked into those as well?
Unfortunately, turnover is still a big issue in the industry, especially with, unfortunately, turnover is still a big issue in the industry, especially with more junior analysts or tier one. And the big challenge for businesses is if you lose a top analyst, you're losing all of their contextual knowledge as well. All of their knowledge that is very unique to your organization. And we look to actually redistribute that knowledge just to de-risk the organization, but also upskill all the analysts in the meantime. So if we can understand the best practices of a top analyst and we have them QA validated, we can distribute that knowledge across the team to ensure that everyone's learning from that person's best practices. And that way everyone can progressively improve their own skill sets. And in turn, this helps them feel more motivated on the job. Yeah, I think it would definitely depend company to company on what their structures are, what their promotion cycles look like. But we are working with a SOC team right now to help them reduce the onboarding time of new analysts by sharing those best practices of top analysts through the on-the-job coaching function. So absolutely, we are definitely working to help upskill analysts faster.
Calculator somewhere where people can potentially look into. Have you crunched some of the numbers? Because a lot of times executives, all they want to see is the bottom line. How much is this, Penfield going to cost us a platform? How much can we save? Do you have those numbers available? If somebody wanted to.
At the moment, that's one of those big audacious goals that we have. Definitely on the to-do list. That's for sure. But it's fun from a marketing perspective. Sitting in on some of these customer calls and, watching the deployment happen and seeing these aha moments and seeing where we've provided that value. So translating that numerically, like that will come as we start to see more repeatability, certainly.
And you are disrupting the market. You have some very big clients as well as some very, large partners, prominent partners, right? Maybe can you, without naming too many names, just I would like to provide some clout to Penfield, like in terms of what you are doing and where you're going. Can you share any kind of insight in terms of where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. I can share a bit. We're working a lot in the intelligence sector. We're deployed across multiple leading managed security service providers. We have a deployment coming up with a large financial institution, but we're strategically partnered with a number of leading cyber technology companies like SIM and SOAR providers because we integrate with those technologies, but we ultimately add value to those platforms and the analysts using those platforms, enabling them to use them better. So we can deploy through marketplaces to ease the deployment process and use those contracting vehicles, but definitely working with some big SOCs, some smaller SOCs, anywhere from 6 analysts to hundreds of analysts can get a lot of value out of Penfield.
Yeah, amazing. And it's also amazing that some of these, service providers and technology companies are, they're seeing Penfield as a, value add to the existing technologies that they currently have. And there's some big names. We can't share it publicly right now, but I highly encourage reaching out to Rachel and getting some insight into that. But it's amazing that, companies such as these ones are realizing that they can leverage something like that. And they're not trying to build it themselves, smart about it, not trying to do that on their own. So before we part ways, what's the easiest way to get in touch with you to get more information about the platform, maybe look into testing out the platform, getting information on what the proof of value looks like? Any insight on that?
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
was going to say there's so many different ways. There's info@penfield.ai, which is very generic. It's just as easy to go to LinkedIn and look for Rachel or look for myself, connect with us, say hi. Because obviously, we like to converse with folks and share our expertise on explainable AI.
So you also encourage folks that are looking at AI tools to make sure that they have the ability to understand what those AI tools do, and it's not just a black box, right? So there's like a input and there's this black box and an output, and there's also like inherent knowledge in terms of what this system does. Perfect. So until then, thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciated. And I really can't wait to see where Penfield goes from here onwards. You have some, I've talked to the founder, Tassine, who's has some big plans for Penfield in terms of not just, in particular the SOC, but there's a lot of different areas within cybersecurity and outside of the cybersecurity world for this system to help out. And, I believe that, making the SOC more efficient is a matter of national security. I think it's, if we can, come to resolution quicker and allow for companies to be more secure and reduce their risks associated with doing business, so we all gain from it. So thank you very much for that contribution. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having us.
For those all who joined, thank you very much for joining today's session. So stay safe online as well as offline, and looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.